Hi, I'm Cooper. I'm going to be sharing about a collective valuation protocol that we've been developing the last couple of years, and the goal is to incentivize public goods like the environmental commons. And so there's going to be 3 parts. I'll try and keep this around 20 minutes, and then there'll be lots of time for questions and exploration. So the first part, I want to talk about this collective valuation we've been developing. And the motivation is, I don't think I need to pitch this to you all. The world is burning, our systems are rubbish. We need to think things again from the ground up. And as Buckminster Fuller would say, you can't change the existing system by fighting it directly. You need to build a new model that makes it obsolete. And so for the last 9 years or so, ever since I discovered that academia is completely broken, I've been designing and testing ideas for what could be a new system to disrupt academia. And the basic question or the goal I had in mind is, imagine some kind of magical system where you could put any kind of a contribution into it, and that system could calculate the relative value of that contribution. Because if we had that system, then we could directly reward people based on the value that they create for their community, and then that would directly incentivize the creation of public goods. So it's obviously a big goal, it's a big dream, there's lots of challenges. First is it needs to be experimentally controlled in some way so that it's not just an attention measure. It needs to be able to handle lots and lots of different types of contributions, so it needs to be a very adaptable and flexible system. And if we're talking about collective value, then it really needs to be able to be inclusive to absolutely everyone in the community, because we need to hear what people value. And so in my research, I spent several years campaigning for open science platforms, learning about the best models out there, connecting, networking, and I realized that reviews are key. We obviously can't... Speak into the mic? Yeah, cool. How's that level there? If I'm shouting. Okay, yeah, cool. So obviously reviews are necessary. We can't figure out what things are worth if we don't do some kind of review, but reviews themselves can be of variable quality. So then this enters the idea of maybe a meta review. There's lots of models that propose this, but they don't propose what the solution is for when someone does a bad or a biased review. And so then you end up with this problem of infinite recursion because it's turtles all the way down. Who's reviewing the reviewers? Who's reviewing the meta reviewers? Who's reviewing the meta reviewers, and so on. And so what I'm going to present to you is a really simple model, about as simple as I think it could get, that's going to keep in mind all of these factors, but I think solve this problem of infinite recursion. And it's based on pairwise comparisons. You just give someone 2 contributions. That's right, woo, for pairwise. You give someone 2 contributions and ask them to tell you which is more X, where X is each dimension of interest. And so somebody's sitting there, they're clicking buttons. Every time they do one of these comparisons, they're earning a unit of value. I'll come back to that. There's a trickier phase now where this is a meta review. It's the exact same interface, so someone's still just doing comparisons, but instead of comparing 2 contributions to the community, now they're comparing 1 contribution and some number of pairwise comparisons. So imagine that somebody's comparing, say, a $100 donation to the idea that somebody has done 100 of these pairwise comparisons. Now, by changing the contributions and then including a range of these different meta reviews, what it allows us to do is create a system that we can autonomously generate a value for every single contribution, and throughout the entire process, no one needs to do anything more complicated than a single pairwise comparison. So I'm going to show you some data that validates that in a second. We prototyped this system by hosting festivals based on Burning Man principles and reviewing each other's contributions, like DJ sets, cleaning the toilets, money that people donated, and so on. And then in November of last year, I took this model and our data to an open science conference called AMOS, and we used then the same model to rate and review contributions to that conference. So here we're talking about talks, we're talking about the fees that people paid, but what's really beautiful is that by allowing people to nominate contributions, we can bring to light things that would normally be ignored. So there was a lot of administration tasks that were nominated, but also really random stuff, like this person who balanced attendance at discussion groups, just the fact that they put aside their own personal interests to make sure that someone had an audience was recognized and rewarded by the community through this system. And so we also asked people to nominate dimensions. These were crowd-generated dimensions that we then measured for each contribution. So the review process, like I said, is these pairwise comparisons. We do a fully balanced design where every contribution is compared to every other contribution. And then we have this meta review process. So we add in a few of these like review contributions, and then again we balance everything so that everything's compared the same number of times. And what that gives us then is a data set where we can calculate the value of every single contribution. And that process is pretty simple. We just fit a baseline to the votes that the review contributions got and use that to interpolate a score for all of the contributions. And so we can do that on any dimension we're interested in. At Amos, we measured 6 dimensions: gratitude, generosity, inclusivity, creativity, and so on. But these could be community-defined dimensions. And what this gives you then is like a multi-dimensional template of all of the contributions to the community measured on each dimension of interest. And once you've got that, you can do anything you want. And I can't tell you how much fun I've been playing with this data set, because it's just a matter of filtering that to then produce gratitude per contribution, gratitude per contributor, unique profiles for each contributor that shows the ways that they've contributed to the community. You can look at gratitude per minute. You can calculate gratitude per contributor. And this is where it gets really cool. If you've got a fixed event, you can calculate the average energetic input per person and subtract that from each person's balance. And what you then have is an automated reward mechanism, which shows those people that have given more than they've received and those people that have received more than they've given. And this could become the beginning of, say, a boundary condition around your community, like Burning Man, that says the first time you engage, you can receive for free, no problem, but the second time we expect you to give back. And so this is a way to quantify the value that people are giving or receiving from the community. And really this is like this is just the beginning. It's kind of, I think of it as seeds that we can plant and can become like an ongoing research paradigm for each community. And so here I'm doing some work that's analyzing the kind of, well, the gratitude for particular contributions to the community versus the cost of those contributions, and showing that some had a net positive gratitude, some had a net negative gratitude, like these plenary talks. But you can then start to interrogate the data and ask, what are we missing here? Because although people might have had more gratitude for the money that we spent on plenary talks than they did for the actual talks, probably that's suggesting that we're actually missing some piece of the puzzle, and that maybe that there's some element that we want to capture in the next version of this prototype, like maybe just the fact that we have plenary talks is motivating people to come along to the conference in the first place. And integrity, so obviously this is a system, anyone can game any system. The response to that is that all of this data and information is transparent and available to the community. And so here, what I'm showing here is just a first pass as how we might measure the reliability of reviewers within our system. And what I'm looking at is just the test-retest reliability when we gave somebody A versus B and B versus A. So we can show that some people are really reliable, some people are less. And if we find somebody that's just clicking buttons and doing it at chance, then we know that they're not really doing the task well. So that's part one. That's kind of our collective valuation protocol we've been developing. What I want to now highlight is just how this, I think, can create a virtuous cycle of value creation. The idea is that this is kind of a circular process. So every stage of the protocol is recognized and rewarded. And so what it means is that as people go through this process, we're generating a template that shows all of the contributions to the community, along with the valuations of those contributions by the same community. And this then creates a direct incentive for people to get involved at every stage of the hierarchy. So this might be at the highest levels, like designing, developing the framework, writing the code that keeps this system in check. Or it might be at the really lowest levels, like just nominating contributions or doing reviews. But what it gives you then is an accessible pathway where anyone can contribute, irrespective of their level of involvement with the project. And of course, if there's money available, then that money can be distributed automatically based on the metrics that we collect, and so that those people then have a direct incentive to keep on giving. So that's kind of one community, and I guess how one person might interact with it. Now I want to zoom out and look at how this can help different communities connect. So the idea is that one community, like at might be iterating towards a particular goal. So we have this goal. One of our goals is to create these replicable One of our goals is to create replicable festival templates so that people could take this template and just create a seed, recreate one of our festivals anywhere in the world. So that's a goal that we're working towards. That's written up in our mission statement. And so what it means is that as we iterate over time, we can be working towards that goal, and we're rating and rewarding contributions with respect to that goal. But in parallel, other communities like Amos and others that we've just started prototyping with have their own mission statements, their own objectives. So they could be continually developing the same system in the ways that work for them. But the critical thing is, as long as they're using the same mechanism at their core foundation, it provides a way for them to communicate value and potentially exchange and recognize value across those borders. And so what you can see here is some data from Amos where we measured 6 dimensions of interest. And here's where we measured 4 dimensions of interest. And the really cool thing is that both of those communities included gratitude as one of those dimensions. And so now they have an interoperable dimension that they can use to reflect, recognize each other's contributions. And so the idea is that this could spread throughout different sectors of society. Different communities could embed different values that they think are worth recognizing. And if you zoom out and look at this as a kind of in value space, what you can see is that as communities adopt this framework, then they can also recognize their partners in crime, partners in the opposite of crime. So those communities that have the same value set as them. So this might be gratitude, or it might be value to the environment, it might be diversity and inclusion, and it would really be up to the communities to decide for themselves what values they appreciate, and then connect with those communities that adopt those same values. And so this is a new slide. I haven't really figured out how to present this yet, but the new idea, I guess, is that this could create a kind of grounded valuenomics, it's a term I'm exploring, that is intended to kickstart a kind of value-driven gift economy. And so from the user perspective, the idea is that you would log on to this app, you would choose the value that you want to recognize, let's say gratitude, and you would then start reviewing contributions. Every time you're doing so, you're expressing gratitude for contributions, but you're also earning gratitude from the community. And so you're building up tokens or units, whatever we want to call them, that you can then pay forward to other people. So if there's somebody that's maybe not even in the community, like your parents or someone that you want to recognize, you could express gratitude through this digitized token and then effectively loop them into the community. What happens there is you've now got a new player in the game, so this thing starts to spread, but you've also just logged a new contribution, which could then also enter into this system and be recognized not just by you, but by the rest of the crowd. And the cool thing is that you could be effectively like predicting the value by assigning some number of tokens, which then is a valuable signal to the community that could then be the basis for kind of training AI systems and so on. I'll come back to that probably. And so that was maybe like the flow for expressing gratitude, but let's say you've got someone that did something really creative and you want to express your appreciation for that creativity. Well, if your community doesn't already recognize creativity, you could log that as a new dimension, effectively kind of proposing it to the new crowd, to the community as a new dimension that we might want to validate. And if there's interest in the community in recognizing that value, then they could also start to farm this value and recognize contributions by doing reviews on that new dimension. Okay, so that's part 2. Part 3, this is where I get a bit crazy and exploratory, but I've been inspired by some of the ideas here at Regen Hub and wanted to kind of riff on some ideas that I've heard that could be an interesting way to explore how this paradigm might help the regeneration movement. And so again, like if we look at this as a value space, the first question really is what values do we feel are important? And I think this is already a discussion we could start having and already something we could embed into our very clunky spreadsheet prototypes. Obviously, I would suggest like something to do with the environment would be important, but I would expect that there'd probably also be a lot of overlapping values with these projects that we've already been prototyping with. And the other 2 elements in our system, you've really got values, contributions, and contributors. And so then what we've been doing with contributions so far is just actions, ideas, goods and services that people have provided. But there was a really beautiful example at a permaculture community where I hosted a workshop, and someone said, what if I want to thank the tree for the shade that they're providing? And I said, great, write it down. So he wrote it down on his little gratitude note, and that went into our system, and it could become a contribution by nature, for example. Or we could start to recognize the goods and services that animals provide. And this is a little nod to Klaus, who has this idea of like harnessing the power of beavers to build dams. Like that's a a contribution that a beaver is making, that we could potentially explore the idea of recognizing these natural elements within our system as contributors themselves. And so that idea is not necessarily too far off what indigenous communities have been doing for a very long time. As I understand it, there are totems, there are families that represent particular animals, geographies and so on. So those families or people could speak to those animals and pieces of nature as their representative. It's this idea of how do we put nature on the board? Well, this system gives us a way to potentially recognize and represent those natural elements. And so, yeah, this is kind of a new idea, like maybe about role play. It's very much related to the last topic. So this is our spreadsheet prototype where people are doing rating contributions. And I had this idea that, like, what if not, this is a new element that I want to add, but what you have is a reviewer column, so this is who's doing the review. But what if that reviewer also had a role? So kind of like the HATS protocol, where people could adopt the persona of water, and they could try and do this comparison, which do you appreciate more, from the perspective of water, or from the perspective of a tree, or the perspective of a badge. And what we might be doing there is kind of creating a seat on the council where nature has a representative, where we are providing the data. But what this gives us then, and this entire system gives us, is a training set where we could start to train AI that represent not just us and our values, but potentially the values of nature itself. And so that's kind of it. These are the take-home messages. It's a radically inclusive review protocol. This is just a proof of concept web app that I showed, but it just shows you every time you're doing reviews, you're getting little rewards, and that's the dopamine hit that keeps you clicking. The idea is that these autonomous rewards can create a virtuous cycle of value creation, and by doing so, it can connect communities with these digitized values. And these are the communities we've prototyped with. Super, super open to prototyping with any community that's interested. Everything we're doing is completely open and available. And what it needs right now is, I guess, interest. We particularly need developers because we've designed an MVP, and we're now building a Web 2 MVP, but I want to start designing with some of you awesome developers about what the Web 3 version might look like. And yeah, that's where we're at. Thanks very much.